Welcome. It looks like we have people pouring in, which is fabulous. Welcome to our 60th anniversary webinar. Today we'll be talking about our legacy of sustainability in partnership with the Palm Springs Historical Society. Really excited for a lot of what we have in store today. So some housekeeping matters to begin with. My name is Ashley Metzger. I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Water Planning for Desert Water Agency. I wanted to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded. However, we do not see your screens, your camera. It is in listen only mode, basically. So if you need to go take a quick restroom break or grab a cup of coffee or water, you are more than welcome to do so. And if you have anything that you would like to ask our fabulous panelists today, you can put that in the Q&A box. So that's the one that has a little Q&A next to it. In the bottom of your screen, when you hover down below, that should pop up. And then there's a little chat icon, which if you are in need of technical support, if you can start writing in the chat, we've got our outreach specialist, Sochi Pena, here to help manage those requests. So again, thank you for joining us. We're going to give folks just another minute or two to join. We are streaming live on Facebook. So if anyone that you were wanting to share this information with wasn't able to make it, they can check back on Facebook or on YouTube later today, and they will be able to see this recording. We will also have it archived on Desert Water Agency's website. So if you want to follow along, anything historical, anything about our anniversary, we have it dwa.org/60, and that's just a 60. We have about 95 people registered for the webinar today. It looks like we've got about 50 folks here now. So again, we're going to give people until about 2:04, let's say, to get logged in and ready. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or you need any technical assistance, go ahead and click on that chat or Q&A button. We already got our first question. Wonderful. Is the presentation live on YouTube now or posted later? It is posted later. However, it is live on Facebook right now. So thank you all for tuning in today. Today is the actual day of our 60th anniversary. So happy birthday to DWA. I see something in the chat about some trouble with audio. Is this being recorded? Yes. Yes, it's being recorded. If for some reason your headphones or your speakers aren't cooperating, no need to stress. I'll go ahead and answer you in chat so you have an idea about that. All right, people are asking as well, are we muted? Yes, everyone attending is muted. There's going to be no audio engagement with the audience, and anything you want to send over via chat and Q&A, we will go ahead and get those questions answered that way. In our experience with webinars during the pandemic, that's been the most successful way rather than trying to let folks unmute and everything. So we are going to go ahead and welcome our board president, Kristen Bloomer, to the screen. She is an absolute delight to work with. She's been working diligently to lead this agency for the past 6 years now, just about, on the board of directors. So welcome, Kristen, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here today. And a special thank you to the Palm Springs Historical Society for co-hosting this event with us. I've been a part of Desert, excuse me. I've been a part of Desert Water Agency's board of directors for about 6 years out of the 60 years. And I'm so glad we're able to connect today to celebrate our anniversary. Back in 1961, who could have imagined we'd be celebrating 60 years with a webinar during a prolonged global pandemic? Our amazing team has kept the water flowing and kept programs running to serve the community for the past 60 years, and especially during the global pandemic. It has truly incredible how much goes on behind the scenes to get high quality, reliable water to the tap. I've also seen how central long-term planning is, and we're looking ahead decades to make sure that future generations can enjoy water like we do today. If you have your water handy, let's do a cheers to the next 60 years. Cheers.
Thank you for that. Yes, cheers to all. You know, we're very fortunate to be in a place in the world and in a country that has wonderful tap water, and not only that, but we're held to very high standards to make sure that that's the case. So thank you, President Bloomer, for those remarks. And now I would like to welcome our esteemed colleagues from the Palm Springs Historical Society, Tom Kiley and Steve Nichols, to the screen. Tom is a Palm Springs Historical Society board member, as is Mr. Nichols. Tom's a second-generation native of Palm Springs. He has a long history of community leadership, including on the Desert Water Agency Board of Directors. He's also served on the California Water Quality Control Board for the Colorado River Basin, which is a huge responsibility and honor. And Tom's father was actually integral in forming DWA in 1961. He also owns and operates an insurance and financial service business in town. Steve Nichols comes from a pioneer family that moved to the desert in the early 1900s. His grandfather, P.T. Stevens, you will learn about in the slides ahead, is one of the forefathers of water in the Coachella Valley. Steve served as the president of Whitewater Mutual Water Company until 2007, when DWA acquired that company. And prior to that, he was a volunteer teacher in Vietnam. He's practiced law. He has worked on grant managing. And these two folks not only are incredible human beings, but a wonderful wealth of knowledge. We look forward to learning so much from you today. Take it away.
Are you there? Oh. Hang in there, Ashley. I think we got a...
It looks good, Tom. I think you're ready to go.
Oh, you can see it?
Yes, sir.
All right. Wait a second now. I've got my part here. Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. I'm Tom Kiley. You'll be meeting Steve Nichols shortly. Let me see if I can get this thing to start working right. We'll be okay here. Okay. Now we're going. Well, good afternoon again. It is a pleasure to be here. We've got a lot to cover in a little bit of time, and so we'll start right in by talking about our wonderful, resourceful Whitewater Aquifer. What we see here is a satellite view of our Coachella Valley, Upper Coachella Valley. This is Highway Interstate 10 and Highway 111, where they combine. This is Whitewater Canyon that you're going to be hearing a lot about today, a source of natural water plus the point of discharge from the Colorado River Aqueduct to come down the river basin and to fill these spreading ponds, which many of you may have seen on your way out of town or into town, Palm Springs. Basically, our abundant aquifer is defined by the Indio Mud Hills and the Little San Bernardino Mountains to the east, clear down to the Salton Sea, and on the west side by the San Jacinto Mountains. You can imagine this is a large sand-filled bathtub into which snow and snow melt and rain have been deposited for millions of years, filling this entire basin with some of the most incredible water in the world. For you engineer types, here again is the USGS map. Again, the Whitewater River Aqueduct basically goes along the east side of our valley down to Salton Sea. There is at Point Happy a small barrier dividing the upper and lower Whitewater Basin back to Palm Springs. So if you were here about 3,000 years ago, this is what Andreas Canyon might have looked like. Certainly is what it looked like 150 years ago. And having just been up there a little while ago, I'm glad to say this is exactly what Andreas Canyon looks like today. One of the major sources of water that supplied and filled our aquifer. In the beginning, there were the Agua Caliente band of Kuya Indians that occupied this area in the Palm Springs area. They were the first inhabitants for thousands of years they've been here. And now we're going to talk about railroad. You'd think it's a speech about water, but so much of what's impactful on our water resources and our land resources deal with how the land was originally developed. In 1853, Congress was trying to unite the east and west of the United States, remembering that in 1850, California had become a state and was kind of out there all by itself, with people like Mexico and Britain and even the Russians taking a good look at how long California would remain a state. So in order to unify the country and to tie California back to the east and the west, they decided that they would authorize a survey of 5 potential routes for Transcontinental Railroad, one of those coming right through the Coachella Valley. In 1854 to 1855, Henry Washington and F.G. McDonald surveyed the southern route, the Southern Pacific Railroad route through Palm Springs. This is, in fact, a copy of their 1856 original survey. And if you look here, this is section 14, our downtown with the mineral springs here. And this would be the Palm Canyon and Tahquitz area. In 1862, as an incentive for the railroad to build this railroad line clear from New Orleans to Los Angeles, Congress passed the Pacific Railroad Act. And that gave the odd numbered sections of land, a section of land being a square mile, on either side of the railroad tracks for 12 miles on either side of the tracks. You know, I thought this would help finance the actual construction of the railroad. Instead of Congress having to pay for the railroad, they would give the land. The railroads could then sell the land or develop the land as they saw fit to pay for the actual construction of the railroad itself. In 1877, that construction began on the southern route of the Transcontinental Railroad and was completed in 1881, passing right through the Coachella Valley. Here's a copy of the early map of the Southern Pacific Railroad, and you can see the route from Yuma through the Coachella Valley and over to Los Angeles. So the federal government had given to the railroad these odd numbered sections of land on either side of the track. And then somebody came along and said, well, wait a minute, what about the Indians that are there? These folks have been there for years and they don't have anything. So in May of 1876, Section 14, the downtown section containing the mineral springs, and a piece of Section 22, which is Mesquite and South Palm Canyon Drive, some 20 acres, was created as the reservation for the Agua Caliente tribe by executive order of Ulysses S. Grant. A year later, his successor, President Hayes, said, you know what, we've given the railroad the odd numbered sections of land. We should probably give the tribe the even numbered sections of land, be done with all federal lands within the Coachella Valley, or the upper Coachella Valley. And they did so, in essence, creating the Agua Caliente Reservation with over 30,000 acres of land, but in essence, creating our famous checkerboard pattern that anybody who's had anything to do with land or water in the last 100 years is familiar with, every other section being a reservation section. In order to manage those reservation lands and other reservation lands, the federal government appointed John Guthrie McCallum. Some people referred to him as Judge McCallum, though he was never a judge. He was an attorney who had a son who had tuberculosis, and he was lobbied very hard for the position of Indian agent of the Mission Agency of California. This area was not just the Agua Caliente tribe, but included over 30 tribes from San Bernardino to Yuma and to the Mexican border. In December of 1883, he was appointed as that Indian agent. And here's a copy of his actual appointment, signed by Chester Arthur. As my wife is fond of saying, hard to believe we had a president named Chester. So in 1883, McCallum starts coming to Palm Springs to survey the territory. In 1886, the federal Indian census of the Palm Springs area, which was designated as Agua Caliente, Colorado Desert, was conducted. This is the entire census for the year of 1886. Showing a total number of 38 people, all with first names only. I guess if you're only 38 people that are here, you don't need a second name. While he was still Indian agent, Judge McCallum purchased privately, began purchasing land in the Palm Springs area. The first purchase he made was a 1/5 interest in 320 acres of land owned by two other folks that had bought it from the railroad. Continuing that year, he bought another 150 acres of land from Mr. Byrne for $800. But probably the best decision he ever made, and one that really had an impact on Palm Springs and water in the future. In December 12th of 1887, he bought 320 acres of land from the Southern Pacific Railroad. This land basically encompasses everything from the Roan Road to Alejo, and from Indian Canyon Drive all the way to the mountains. He paid $800 for that, a total of about $2.50 an acre. If only we had been there then. In 1885, McCallum resigned as Indian agent. He had decided that he would be better suited to development of water and land in Palm Springs. And here is, in fact, a copy of his resignation. In February of 1886, he filed for 300 miners inches of water from Chino Canyon, where the tramway is now located. Steve's going to give you a good lesson in miners inches and the funny measurements of water that we have, and there will be a test at the end of the webinar. In a year later, in 1887, McCallum incorporated the Palm Valley Land and Water Company, and he deeded to them that 300 miners inches of water rights in Chino Canyon, as well as obtaining another 1,500 miners inches of water in the Whitewater Canyon. In October of 1897, however, after John McCallum had died, His son Harry again filed for those same water rights in Chino Canyon to protect an error that his father may have made in the initial filing. And he used that water to supply domestic water to the 23 customers living in Palm Springs in 1897. After Harry's death in 1904, those water rights were sold to Ralph Rogers. And like many other pioneers, there's a long story to his history that time doesn't permit us to go into today, but would be a fascinating story to share at some point in the future. So here is the Palm Valley Colony lands that McCallum in 1887 had started to put together. Again, here is section 14. This is downtown Palm Springs. This would be Tockwitz and Indian Canyon. But as my wife is fond of saying, you can't be a land baron if your land is barren. And so while McCallum had land and had some water rights, he had not a way of getting those two together. So in February of 1887, the Palm Valley Land and Water Company hired W.H. Hurley to construct a 1 mile test ditch, if you will, a stone line irrigation ditch from near where Windy Point is, right near the Whitewater station of the Southern Pacific Railroad. That ditch was to be 40 inches wide at the bottom, 60 inches or 5 feet tall. And for digging that ditch in the middle of the desert, he was paid 75 cents per rod for 16.5 feet. Obviously did not do it alone. It was backbreaking work, and he was responsible for providing all of the food and lodging and equipment needed for his laborers to dig that ditch. He must have done a good job, though, because in May of 1887, he got another contract for 6 miles of ditch, this time at 85 cents per 16.5 feet. And here's an 1887 photo of the actual crew that dug that ditch through the desert in the middle of the summer. I don't know if California had child labor laws then, or maybe these are just short workers. But can you imagine encamped out in those conditions in the summer of 1887, digging a ditch through the sand of the desert? They were pretty successful at it, however. This is near the Southern Pacific station at Whitewater, what we used to call the Palm Springs station. And that line comes all the way in through and down to section 15, the 320 acres of land that McCallum chose to develop. So now they had land, he had land and he had water. And the next thing that McCallum needed was people to purchase that land. This is an announcement from an 1887 San Francisco area newspaper advising there's going to be a big land auction in Palm Springs, and that the Palm Valley Land and Irrigation Company is going to auction off sections of this beautiful paradise. This is an actual ad from the Los Angeles Times from October of 1887. And it's interesting to note, not only were they advertising the sale of the land, but they had made an arrangement with the Southern Pacific Railroad to provide discount fares on the railroad to Palm Springs for the auction. Here again is one of their early maps of Palm Springs. And in fact, this is the actual map of the land. Again, here is section 14. These were the lots that were going to be auctioned in 1887 to outsiders. However, McCallum wasn't the only person that was speculating in land at that time. There were others, as this map of Palmdale shows. Palmdale was a development that was planned for section 25, what we now know as Smoke Tree Ranch. So this would be East Palm Canyon Drive, just to the east of Sunrise Way. An adventurous plan, the entire city laid out, as you can see here. In order to access this area, they had built a small narrow gauge railroad from here all the way to Garnett. And that narrow gauge railroad brought in people from the Southern Pacific to come in and select the lot in their dream paradise of Palmdale. In addition to Palmdale, B.B. Barney started a development called the Garden of Eden in the late 1880s, early 1890s. This included all of Section 35, a piece of Section 36. You would now know this is the Canyon Country Club area. And his idea again was to do a beautiful, complete town built with lots, plenty of water from Andreas Canyon, which we can talk about at length sometime, but sold this to folks that were going to come and share in his paradise at the Garden of Eden. This is the Garden of Eden about that time. Any of you have had the opportunity to ride from Smoke Tree Ranch stables up through the canyons, you'll recognize Araby Point at the mouth of the canyons. I'm still looking for Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, but maybe they're under a cactus. In 1895, probably one of the most historic events for the Palm Springs area began with a drought which lasted 11 years. In February of 1897, John McCallum dies watching his paradise slowly withering into the desert. Another victim of the drought was the Palmdale Experiment. These are the actual narrow gauge railroad cars that brought people to that Smoke Tree area in search of paradise. These cars were actually trolley cars from San Francisco Trolley that were repurposed for the narrow gauge railroad that ran but a few times to Palmdale. The Garden of Eden that B.B. Barney had so proudly tried to develop also suffered with the drought. There was an ongoing dispute between the federal government and the federal government's representation of the Indians and Mr. Barney over the water rights to Andreas Canyon. In an effort to settle that dispute once and for all, in 1906, the federal government gave Mr. Barney $6,000 in gold coin to secure the land and the water. So while in 1909, all the dreams of land development had turned to dust from the drought, still there were optimistic people willing to take a risk and to follow a dream. One of those people was my great-grandmother, Nellie Kaufman, who in 1909, with her husband, Dr. Harry Kaufman, the first doctor in Palm Springs, came to Palm Springs to open up the Desert Inn, originally a sanatorium for tuberculars. It was later shortly turned into a hotel, very famous hotel. This is great-grandfather Harry, who's looking on the veranda of the Desert Inn, probably looking for an iced mocha frappuccino, because this very veranda today is Starbucks at Tahquitz and Palm Canyon. In order to supply water to this area, there was an old Indian ditch that had come out of Tahquitz Canyon, provided water some of the time. It was in pretty dilapidated condition. And the townies, as these folks were known, and the Indians had gone back and forth again, arguing about whose water it was and who would maintain the ditch. It all came to a head, and in 1911 there was a lawsuit against the townies by the Indian Irrigation Service. That lawsuit was negotiated to an agreement because the ditch crossed both reservation lands and non-reservation lands. There needed to be cooperation between the townies and the tribe, and I'm happy to say they made that resolution. The Indian Irrigation Service was then charged with watching over the Palm Valley Water Company, who was charged with rebuilding that ditch to deliver Palm Springs its water. Those of you who had the opportunity to go up to Tahquitz Canyon, you'll recognize Tahquitz Falls. And this is, in fact, the survey crew that was hired to begin the ditch from Tahquitz into Palm Springs. This is a 1911 photo of that ditch being constructed, looking up into Tahquitz Canyon. Here is the ditch as it flowed into town. This area back here is the original McCallum homestead. his ranch. Right by this tree is now the driveway, the opening to the Valerie restaurant, with the willows just over here to the right. This is what the ditch looked like, providing water to Palm Springs in 1911. This is through the Desert Inn grounds. The water came by ditch and was pumped into this water tower to provide pressure for dishes and showers and good things like this. This is an early 1920s photo of a car caravan from Yuma to Los Angeles promoting a new road. When I grew up on the Mashie Golf Course, which is just behind where the Valeries is now. There's some condos here now, but this was the Topbush Ditch. This is the road that leads up to the Albert Frey House, to give you some idea where it is. This was the Mashie Golf Course over here, which is a small chip and putt golf course that belonged to the Desert Inn. And it was flood irrigated. The Zanjeros, or the irrigators, would come and insert a board in here and divert water into this diversion and flood irrigate this entire area. And again, this is what it looked like when I was a boy living here. This is a house that Nellie Kaufman built for her mother, Jane Orr, known as Big Orr. It eventually ended up on the Mashie grounds. It had started at where Sonny Bono's statue is now, but was moved to the Mashie Golf Course later. It's my great-great-grandmother's house that I grew up in. And as you can see, prosperity was starting to take hold. The dark days of the drought were starting to be behind us. In 1928, Nellie Kaufman borrowed a significant amount of money from Tom O'Donnell, for whom she built a house on the top of the hill. This photo is taken from Ojos de Dejo, the Eyes of God house that Tom O'Donnell occupied just above the Desert Inn. This would be Palm Canyon Drive, and here's where the Topbush Ditch would bring water to the town. Prosperity was really in the forefront, and the dark days of the drought seemed behind us. As emphasized by the ribbon cutting of the plaza, the brand new development in 1936 that took place. Today, if you're standing in this area, you're probably looking in the windows of the See's Candy to see what looks good. Stepping back for a moment, another part of the water story became that in 1918, the Coachella Valley Water District was formed. Prior to 1918, the Imperial County was looking at a way to tap the resources of the Whitewater River and to export them down to the Imperial County for agriculture. In order to stop that event, the locals created the Coachella Valley Water District and then began a state process to adjudicate those waters to see who actually would own the water. That adjudication began in 1918. And it continued until an initial order of determination in 1928, establishing the water rights by appropriation to many users on the basin. To read this is to read the history of the upper Coachella Whitewater Basin. It's a fascinating, though sometimes dry legal book. There are names that are very famous in there and really important to the creation of the Palm Springs area. One last little venture along the rights of appropriation. In 1913, C.E. Bunker moved to Palm Springs and struck a claim for 600 acre feet of water north of the intake of the Palm Valley Water Company. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to talk about Mr. Bunker and company. There are so many characters that were so important to the history of water in Palm Springs that we could go on for days. But probably one of the very most important people is P.T. Stevens. And with that, I will turn it over to Steve Nichols.
Well, thanks, Tom. It's great to be here, and I I'm going to share my screen. There is PT Stevens, son of a gun. PT and his family arrived in Palm Springs around 1913, and he immediately saw the need for a well-rationalized water system if the little community of Palm Springs was to grow and prosper. He came here with his family. If I can just get rid, okay, that looks a lot better. He arrived with his wife Frances and their daughter Sally Stevens, who later was my mother. And PT was a visionary. He had been ranching in Gunnison, Colorado, and had become very adept at securing water for his ranch from distant streams. And when he arrived in Palm Springs, he saw that he would need to put that expertise to some use here. And he looked particularly at Whitewater Canyon as a source. This is sort of in the opposite direction from Tockwitz and the other projects that Tom has so well described. There were so many of these little precursors to what eventually became the Desert Water Agency in terms of efforts to develop water and land in the Palm Springs area, particularly water. Well, the two really went hand in hand, as Tom pointed out. And so Stevens realized that, but by the way, you can actually see him anytime you want, day or night. He and Alva Hicks are permanently etched in the Union Bank building at the corner of Ramon Road and Indian Canyon. They're really the two pioneers of the modern history of water in Palm Springs. Alva Hicks started the Palm Springs Water Company, and PT Stevens started the Whitewater Mutual Water Company at around the same time, in the late 20s. Stevens got very busy right away, acquiring water rights and also land, and all related to water and to consolidating water in a way that would hopefully, in his view, increase the water availability to Palm Springs. And he was a visionary. I think the proof of that really is in the 1926 contract mentioned at the bottom, where Stevens actually included a provision for hydroelectric generation using water coming out of Chino Canyon. I have not seen any other of these early contracts that even mentions the possibility of generating power using the local water. So he was thinking way ahead, and he was doing all of this thinking and doing and consolidating when he was actually 75 years old and still going strong. It was just an amazing sort of last part of his life that he devoted so much time to this. Tom mentioned water diversions and appropriation. The way that you would stake a water claim back in the early days of the last century was to create a diversion on the Whitewater River to divert water to the land that you wanted to use the water on, and then you would have to measure the water that you were actually using. So you would create a sort of a flume box of this sort. There were many different kinds. This photo is actually the only actual photo that I've seen of such a diversion. And PT Stevens did this back in 1921, together with a fellow by the name of Flack. You have this wooden box. You have a dam, a rock dam that you can see off to the right. A pool is created. The pool then overflows a weir, essentially a dam on the box. And you can measure on the upstream side of the dam, you can actually put a ruler and measure the distance to the top of the water that's flowing over the weir. And you can actually get a very accurate measurement of the rate of flow without using any electronic devices or mechanical devices of any sort. All you needed was a dam, the pool, and a ruler. And you would, these flow rates would be given in miners inches. And Tom promised you that I would give you a seminar on miners inches. We just don't have time for that today. Suffice it to say that depending on where you were in the West, the miners inch actually had a different value. I mean, why make it the same everywhere? That's just too easy. So in Colorado, the miners inch would be maybe 40 miners inches would be the equivalent of 1 cubic foot per second. Whereas in California, it would be 50 cubic feet per second, except if you were in Northern California, when it will actually be 40 cubic feet per second. And this will all be on the test. So you have to know this. This is all you have to know about miners inches. So I'm going to move on. But this is how you would make a claim to water. You would have a way of measuring the water, and you would then have to convey it to the land that you wanted to use it on, and that's what was done numerous times. It's all spelled out, as Tom says, in the adjudication that occurred later on. So the Stevens decides, okay, it's time to incorporate the water company. He and 4 other folks were the initial directors of the company, including Alva Hicks, who we'll learn later was founded the Palm Springs Water Company, and Tom O'Donnell, who was intent on building a golf course over near the mountain. We needed a source of water, so he also joined the effort. And so was born the Whitewater Mutual Water Company. One of the first things that PT did was to hire Lawrence Crossley to manage, to be really the first manager of the Whitewater system, and also helped to lay out the El Mirador golf course and the irrigation facilities for the El Mirador Hotel. Indeed, the hotel and golf course were prime reasons that Stevens was trying to consolidate these water resources so as to have enough for those projects. And that was also, as I said, Tom O'Donnell's motivation to be involved. Crossley was just an amazing guy, and he did an excellent job on these early projects, and later on became a developer in his own right. But these projects got him off to an excellent start here in the desert. He had arrived in the desert a little bit earlier in the 20s and immediately set about being involved in the Whitewater Company. I should mention, actually, before going to this slide, this is the El Mirador Hotel, which obviously needs a little more landscaping. But in addition to Lawrence Crossley, there were some other individuals through the history of the company who were really key to the company's success. There was Stan Carlson, who was a longtime engineer for the company, Stanley Clark, who in the later years of the company was the general manager, and Frank Devers, who was also one of the important managers of the water system during the company's life. And so here you have the El Mirador Hotel. I won't spend too much time, but in the background, it's interesting to note that you can actually see the evidence of one of the first airstrips in Palm Springs. And then behind that, just barely, you can see the beginning of the layout of the El Mirador golf course, which all of these things were obviously in early stages of development. So how do we know that was an airstrip? Well, here we have some planes on the airstrip, so it must be an airstrip. And it's just an amazing, look how busy it is. It's almost Palm Springs Airport on Sunday morning. It's just an amazing slide. You remember, this is sometime in the mid to late 1920s. But I won't dwell on it. No flights of fancy here. We're going to go back to the Whitewater story, and there was a ditch coming from Whitewater Canyon, an open ditch coming from the canyon all the way into Palm Springs. Prescott Stevens realized that this ditch was inadequate for the purposes that he and his fellow early directors of the Whitewater Company were envisioning. So a pipeline had to be installed, and that would be the first order of business. This slide is in here sort of out of order, but it relates to, you know, doing things to control water, you know, to bring a pipeline in to replace a ditch. And we had in the office the kind of Bible for our operation, which was this Handbook of Water Control, which was a really illusory concept, because the idea that we were really controlling water was a little bit of hubris. I think if you look behind that dam, for example, today at the reservoir that's behind it, you'll have some sense of how much we're in control versus nature and water itself. And so those are things that you always keep in mind, you know, even though you're trying to manage and control the water, you're up against larger forces, and it's helpful to remember that. But this was the book to look in for conversions from miners' inches to cubic feet per second to acre feet per month or per year, whatever you wanted. You could find it in this book, and so it was well thumbed and referred to constantly. So that's enough about water control. Back to the exciting story of putting in a pipe from Whitewater Canyon to Palm Springs. We have this manufacturing facility in Ontario making the pipe, and so PT Stevens went and bought some pipe there, put it on trucks, sent it to Palm Springs, and got the trucks as close as he could to where the trench was going to be for the new pipeline, close to the canal, and offloaded the pipe there. And then the pipe was put into the trench to replace the old ditch. And a lot of people ask me, why did they lay the pipeline that way? When you glue that pipe together, it's not going to really carry much water, is it? I mean, the lengths are the wrong, the alignment is in the wrong direction. And that's an excellent point, very perceptive. But there is an easy answer, which is that you actually put the pipe in the ditch where you can get the truck closest to the ditch, and then you roll the pipe lengths down the ditch to where ultimately they would be connected. So that's why they all stack up in the ditch, seemingly in the wrong orientation. When you get the pipe where you want it, you put it upright and put some cement on it, and then you put the joints together, and immediately you see in the background what they've done. They've put sand over the pipe to dirt to keep the pipe from drying too quickly while the cement is curing, and the sun was probably, as it is today, quite hot, maybe not quite as hot given what climate change has done to us today. But there you are, putting pipe together, and I assure you it was glued or cemented together in the right orientation. Here's Prescott Stevens admiring his handiwork and that of the folks really actually doing the work. And bear in mind that this is a 12-mile pipeline, so he's admiring what may be near the completion point of this 12-mile project. And you know, in those days, that was quite an undertaking. I mean, it would be a feat today as well. You're crossing the open desert between here and Whitewater Canyon, and not easy to dig in. And so the result represents a lot of hard work and sweat. The alignment of the pipeline followed very closely the alignment of the previous ditch. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, you are at the intake in Whitewater Canyon, and the pipeline follows the alignment shown, which is all downhill right into the city of Palm Springs, or really not, there's no city. You're talking about the village of Palm Springs. There will be no city until about 10 years later, when Palm Springs was incorporated in 1938. But the little village is there. It's clearly not as big as it would become. Here's the intake itself in Whitewater Canyon, which was the source, and the water was consolidated at this intake, put into this large intake canal. And then the photographer is probably standing very close to the weir, the measuring weir over which the water would flow, and then into the pipe to take it to Palm Springs. That's PT and a couple of his friends admiring the water flows. One interesting fact about Whitewater Canyon, which is illustrated in this picture, you see all that verdant foliage right behind these three guys, but in the foreground, it's desert. I mean, why aren't those trees growing down near this this facility? And the fact is that the fault line, the San Andreas Fault, runs right through the canyon at that point, which creates in effect, a kind of an underground dam that forces water that's just below the surface running in the river bed to the surface to become part of the surface flow, and thereby increasing the water available to the Whitewater Company. And so these guys at this, PT wasn't the first guy to notice this. There had been folks previously who had noticed that phenomenon, but he was the first guy to actually put in a system that would make full use of the potential by installing a pipeline into Palm Springs. When the water gets to Palm Springs, it has to be distributed to the users, and what would happen is it would flow into these distribution boxes. This one is a 6-gate box, so there would be 6 pipelines running out of this box to the users on the system. All of this is by gravity flow, by the way. The whole thing operated without any electricity or any sort of enhanced power mechanism of any kind. The gravity was utilized, and only later, much later in the company's life, did pumps have to be installed to augment some of the flows in some places. But during the early days, this was all done without getting a single bill from the precursors of Southern California Edison Company. The other side of this box shows you some kind of architectural flair in making these boxes. I detect a little bit of I guess maybe you can't call it mid-century modern yet, because we haven't even gotten close to the middle of the century. But I guess you could call it Art Deco with a kind of a hint of what's to come. That wasn't meant to be architectural, obviously. The whole point of this thing was to be utilitarian and get the water where it needed to go. If you really want to see some interesting Art Deco water facilities, you can look at the pumping stations along the Metropolitan Water District Aqueduct from the LA Basin or from the Colorado River, I should say, into the LA Basin. Now there are some interesting architectural gems, but that's another diversion. We're coming back to our story here. Here's the survey record for both the canal and the pipeline as they would come into Palm Springs, and again demonstrating that the village of Palm Springs was tiny at this time, and there would be additional pipes coming off this main, what you could call the aorta of the system here. There would be pipes that would run out to the individual, to the properties of the individual shareholders. So now, this is talking about water can be kind of a dry subject unless you, get the human element back into the picture from time to time. This is my mother. Well, she wasn't my mother yet. Sally Stevens, who apparently had some inclination to get into the water business herself. Here she is with a stick and a canal. Maybe she thinks she's measuring the water. She doesn't have a weir, so I don't know how she could be doing that. But she also could just be having fun. I mean, she's a young girl, and that's probably more likely. But she was very much a part of the sort of Whitewater family, and her father, having started the system. Speaking of the Whitewater family, here are some young trainees, my brother and me, at very young ages, learning at the knee of Willie Crossley, who was the water master for the gravity flow system in Palm Springs, knew everything about how to get that water, where it needed to go, which valves needed to be turned, and when they needed to be turned, and how much they needed to be turned. And there were a lot of valves, and he would take us around in his pickup truck, and my brother and I were required to learn the location of all these valves. And even later, we were required to learn how many turns to put on each valve to make the water go precisely where you wanted it to, depending on what the season and day of the week were. We didn't like the uniforms at all. They were really cheesy. We thought that later on, we got the Whitewater issue khaki shirts, and we were very happy that we had graduated. Willie's son, Frank Devers, also worked for the company, as I mentioned earlier, and so kind of another family relationship that followed the Whitewater arc. More family and non-family in this case. My father, Culver Nichols, on the left, was president of the company for many years, and Jesus Nunez was the water master at the intake. He ran the intake system, and really was a kind of a genius at it. He had ways of anticipating when there would be storms on the Whitewater River way up the canyon, hours and hours away from the intake, and in terms of the effect of water flows there. And yet he would be prepared for them, and very, very essential to the operation of the company. There's a photo I really enjoy. You've got three guys here who all have relationships with water in one way or another. The guy on the left is Albert Frey, who someday will be recognized as a great architect. There's Willie Crossley in the middle, who we saw earlier trying to teach the young Nichols boys how to manage a water system. And on the right, you have Harold Hicks, who for many years was president of the Palm Springs Water Company. And these guys are all probably talking about water, or who knows, maybe they're talking about Art Deco architecture, or something else relevant to some of the slides we've seen earlier. I just love this picture, and I'm going to wrap it up with a picture of Alva Hicks, who started the Palm Springs Water Company, shown here in Snow Creek. And just a word about the Palm Springs Water Company. It was a for-profit water company, whereas the Whitewater Company was a nonprofit, mutually owned water company, meaning that I think I may have explained this before, the users of the water were the shareholders. There was no dividend, no money dividend, but that was the way it worked. And finally, now we have the water agency, a public agency. So I'm going to turn it back to Tom now, and Tom, take it away. It's been great sharing this information and being part of this program. Happy anniversary to the water agency.
Okay. Can you see the slide, Steve?
Yep, they're up.
Oh, good. Okay. Wonderful. And let me get, hang on just a second here, folks. I'll be right with you. All right, I'm going to try and speed through this. I know we've got a lot to cover still, and we'll try and get right through it. In 1927, Tom O'Donnell down the golf course loaned money to Alva Hicks, $30,000, to purchase the Palm Valley Water Company. This is really important because he incorporated it in November of 1928 as the Palm Valley, as the Palm Springs Water Company. And in 1930, he filed for rights on Snow Creek, water that still flows into Palm Springs today. This is his original intake in the Chino Canyon area. Some of the most incredible water as part of the system. That Chino Canyon water comes from near the tramway area through a series of pipelines and into Palm Springs. This was originally from 1936. In 1960, the voters of the state of California approved Proposition 1, which was to provide Feather River water to the entire state from the Oroville Dam area. Here is a map. This is the Oroville area. The California Aqueduct was to bring water all the way to Southern California to San Diego. Another important aqueduct, of course, is the 1930s Colorado River Aqueduct that was created by Metropolitan. And it's critical to the Desert Water Agency story because while Desert Water Agency was to be a state water contractor and be entitled to a portion of this water from Northern California, the cost of the entire bond without the Palm Springs piece was just about $1.9 billion. The feeling was that a bond issue of over $2 billion, which is what it would have been to include Palm Springs, would not pass the voters. And so the Palm Springs portion of that aqueduct was left off. In recent years, cost estimates have been made for redoing that aqueduct from San Bernardino to Palm Springs, and that aqueduct alone today would be over $2 billion. In 1960, following the passage of that, the community of Palm Springs formed a committee which led to the creation of the Desert Water Agency, so that it could be a state water contractor, one of the 29 contractors available to purchase water from Northern California. Frank Bogart, our mayor at the time, and Steve's dad, Alva Hicks, and my dad were all part of that process to create the Desert Water Agency. And this is the current boundary of the agency. In addition, in June 5th, 1961, Senate Bill 1082, carried by a friend of Palm Springs, Gordon Colon, created the Desert Water Agency, and it was signed into law on July 11th, becoming effective exactly 60 years ago today. Much to the disdain of some of our friends at the Coachella Valley Water District, whose hoped that they would represent the entire valley and be the only state water contractor. In July of 1962, Desert Hot Springs joined the Desert Water Agency area. And the most important thing is that because we didn't have an aqueduct that connected us from San Bernardino to the California Aqueduct, a deal was made between Desert Water Agency and the Metropolitan Water District to swap water, as it were. DWA would provide Metropolitan with its share of the California Water Project water, and Metropolitan would in turn provide DWA with an exact amount of water from the Colorado River Aqueduct. In 1973, that replenishment of the aquifer actually began, and it began. This is an early map of the Colorado Aqueduct, water being taken in at Parker Dam, flowing through the Coachella Valley to the Whitewater discharge point, and then it's used to recharge here. Fascinating, interesting story. Would be fun to do an entire webinar on the construction of the aqueduct, including the construction of a 13-mile tunnel under Mount San Jacinto with pick and shovel and a little bit of dynamite that was done in less than a year. In 2008, the Desert Water Agency purchased the Whitewater Mutual Water Company. This is probably one of the preeminent water resources purchases in the history of the valley. The Nichols family, which was the primary shareholder in the Whitewater Mutual Water Company, and had a significant water rights, the company did on the Whitewater River, had the ability to sell this water right to almost anyone, certainly people within the valley, and unfortunately folks from outside of the valley who would have loved the opportunity to bottle and export that water or to export it to other areas of the country. in keeping with his family's history of preserving resources for their community. The Nichols family graciously agreed to sell their interests in Whitewater to the Desert Water Agency, and that has become a major source of continued recharge for the agency on the beautiful Whitewater River, with the Colorado River flowing through as well. And with that, I would like to say thank you for the ability for the opportunity to be here with you today, and I'll turn it over to Mark Krause.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Kiley and Mr. Nichols. Those were fabulous presentations, chock full of wonderful information, not only about this valley's history, but about your families. So a very intimate perspective that we appreciate. We're going to turn it over to Mark Krause, our fearless leader here at Desert Water Agency. He has spent the past 26 years as an agency employee, and prior to that, he was a consultant working for the agency. So 30 years plus of his career dedicated to DWA and to the Palm Springs community. Mark is a graduate of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. He's a registered civil engineer. He's also an amazing human being and the best boss I've ever had. So with that, I will invite Mark to speed through the first few slides of his presentation and then get into the meat of what DWA does today and is looking to tomorrow.
Thank you, Ashley. Let me get set up here. Hopefully. Can you see first slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ashley. And I didn't pay her to say that last part, but I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate Tom's and Steve's presentation. Really lays the foundation for my presentation. And, you know, Palm Springs started off as a very small village and had all those surface water sources around it. The west end of the Coachella Valley has a lot of surface water coming into it. And they didn't need to pump water like we do today. Today, 95% of our water comes from the groundwater aquifer, and only about 5% from those streams that Tom and Steve talked about. And that's really the problem. When you look at the legacy of sustainability, there really is a legacy of sustainability. The Coachella Valley Water District started recharging the aquifer by trapping the stormwater out of the Whitewater River back in 1918 when they were formed. So they kind of saw that, you know, the groundwater supply was not a sustainable supply, and surely the surface water, the streams and the brooks coming into Palm Springs were not sustainable. So out of that need for more water and not having enough, even though we have 40 million acre feet of water under the ground, sustainability is about putting back in what you take out. So there really isn't that much natural recharge into that basin. That water built up over, you know, thousands of years, and it was not able to supply the growing needs in Palm Springs. So as you saw around the 1940s, things really took off, and groundwater levels were important and they were dropping. So see if I get this to advance. It advanced for me before. Okay, there we go. As Tom said, in 1961, a special act of the legislature created Desert Water Agency. So the forefathers in Palm Springs or in the Coachella Valley saw a need to import water. And that water comes to us from Northern California. Up here, Lake Oroville is above the Delta, above San Francisco. That water is released down into the bay, into the Delta, along with a lot of other tributaries like the San Joaquin River. And then it's picked up and it travels 444 miles down to Lake Paris, which is in Riverside, and it's in the east part of, or excuse me, the west part of Riverside. It's about 80 miles away. And as Tom said, that we don't have a connection. We don't have a direct connection to this surface or this water supply that we contracted for. In 1962, we signed a contract with the state to be a water contractor. We're one of 29. And so we have rights to this water, but it just doesn't get us, it doesn't get all the way down to us. And there's a gap right here. And that's today, that's about a $3 billion gap. So it's unaffordable to build that piece, but there was lucky for us, the Metropolitan Water District has their Colorado River Aqueduct coming off the Colorado River and heading west, and it comes right through the valley. There's the Salton Sea, and this aqueduct comes through the west part of the valley, actually comes right through Desert Water Agency's boundaries. And it was a perfect solution. We could trade water with Metropolitan. They could take our state water project supplies and give us an equal amount of Colorado River water. So that's what we've been doing back, since 1967. This agreement has been modified several times, but it's still the same agreement for trading that water bucket for bucket. And in 1973, we got our first delivery of that water, not off the state water project, but off the Colorado River Aqueduct. Then later in 1968, Desert Water Agency acquired Palm Springs Water Company and the Cathedral City Water Company, and we became a water purveyor. So not only a water importer, but we were delivering water to homes and businesses. And we acquired the surface water rights that those companies had. So you heard a little bit about that from Tom and Steve. We have rights in Snow Creek and Falls Creek, and also Chino Creek. And later on, we acquired rights in the Whitewater River. So we acquired all the surface water rights. We acquired the wells that they had already drilled by 1968. There was a lot of groundwater being used, and all the pipelines and reservoirs that you see on the hillsides around Palm Springs. So as I said, in 1973, we received our first delivery. That water comes down the Whitewater River and then into replenishment facility ponds. And you saw that in one of Tom Kiley's first slides. This is a picture of the ponds, and they're located between the I-10 and Highway 111 at the west end of the valley. And we're able to put in the capacity of this facility is 500,000 acre feet per year. And in 2017, we were able to put in around 400,000 acre feet of water, which is just tremendous. It's probably one of the best replenishment facilities in the state. So we have to work closely. Those ponds belong to Coachella Valley Water District. So we have to work closely with them to manage those ponds, the basins, and we split some of the costs that are necessary to move that water down into the valley. We do that proportionally with them, depending on how much either one of us pumps out of the ground. And together, we have that exchange agreement with Metropolitan. So we do a lot with Coachella Valley Water District. We took advantage of a condition on the Colorado River Aqueduct. There's some pressure available when we release that water. So you can see the water coming out of our hydroelectric facility. And this is the Whitewater River right here upstream in the canyon. So that pressure we're using to generate hydroelectric power. This is a 1 megawatt hydroelectric plant. And so whenever we receive water, like in 2017, when we got that 400,000 acre feet, this plant ran all year long. It's been a great plant. It paid itself off in, I think, less than 10 years. We built another one in Snow Creek. We have a lot of pressure there too. And what we do with that money is we offset our water rates. It costs a lot of money to convey water, to import it. And so that's one of the benefits. The other benefit is obviously clean energy. So this is creating some carbon-free energy for the valley. Another thing we do is water recycling. We started that in 1988. Our first phase was a 5 million gallon per day plant. And then in 1995, we expanded that. We doubled it to 10 million gallons per day. And since 1988, we've produced 106,500 acre feet of water. So this is water that golf courses and the parks in Palm Springs, they would have pumped it out of the ground. And that's really good water. It's potable water. Instead, they're getting recycled water And that's helping water quality. This water isn't going back into the aquifer, it's being used on the grass, and it's improving water quality. The grass is soaking up that nitrogen. So it's a win-win situation for the agency and for the customers. In 2002, Mission Creek, which is the basin, it's a sub-basin on the north side of the I-10 freeway. Basically, this basin is serving the Desert Hot Springs area. That basin also had the same problem as the basin under Palm Springs. The water levels had been going down for decades. So it was time to start replenishment in that basin. And we built these basins. This is an overhead view. And then this is the basins with water in them close up. And we put in 165,276 acre feet of water. And it's been very successful. As this last bullet says, we've stabilized the water levels, the groundwater levels, and in a lot of cases, those levels have actually risen. So that's been a very good thing for that basin. Also, in the 2000s, we decided to build a solar facility. Shell Solar came to us, and they wanted to do a big demonstration project. And there wasn't really a lot of solar going on in 2003 or 2. That's when we were planning this. So we built a 350 kW array. It's this area right back here. That was the first phase. And that powers our operations center completely. We've been off the grid since 2005. It was so received so well by everyone that we thought, well, why don't we expand it? So we expanded it in 2014 to provide most of the power to our recycling facility. So that's we've produced 11,600 megawatts since 2005, which is equivalent to around 69,000 barrels of oil. So it's been very beneficial to the environment, and it really cuts the cost of recycled water, and it cuts a lot of our operating costs. All these fields are pretty much paid off. Another thing we did in the 2000s was remove the grass around our operations center. As you can see, we have a lot of grass, and we decided, hey, we need to set a good example. So we got rid of the grass, converted it to desert landscaping. We put walking paths through there. You can see right here, there's a label that tells you what kind of tree that is. So every bush in this whole area has a label. It allowed people to come in and see what you could do when you took your grass out, how good it could look. They got a close-up look at the plants that they might want to put in their own garden, and it's very informative and educational, and it really is well received by our customers. Groundwater management. So this is this blue line is the boundary of Desert Water Agency. It goes way up. This is Highway 74, so we go up beyond Highway 74, and then this is above Desert Hot Springs. This is the Mission Creek Basin, and we go up above that to the county line. And then this is the pass. This is the Morongo or the San Gregonio Pass area. So there's a little bit of that basin in our boundaries. We have Mission Creek in our boundaries. This is the Garnet Hill sub area. That's in our boundaries. And then this is the Indio or the Whitewater sub basin, which is within our boundaries. So we have 3 sub basins and 1 sub area. And as I said before, we've been importing water since 1973 to be sustainable. So we've been doing that. But in California, there's a lot of groundwater basins that are overdrawn. And the state was very concerned, especially in the San Joaquin Valley, where they have a lot of subsidence and water levels are really going down dramatically. They passed a law in 2014, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and basically the law says, you have to put back into the aquifer what you take out. You can't take out more. You can't continue to take the water out and have the water levels drop, and that has to be accomplished by 2040. We've already accomplished that, and they told us, we're basically doing what the law requires, and the water management plans that we already had in place were accepted by the state as groundwater sustainability plans. And in 2015, we elected to become a groundwater sustainability agency over all the subbasins that underlie our boundaries. Then, as I mentioned before, when we acquired the Palm Springs Water Company and the Cathedral City Water Company, that came with water rights, and some of the water rights were in Falls Creek and Snow Creek. There's a little village in Snow Creek that relies 100% on surface water. And we've been providing surface water to the city of Palm Springs and to this village for 50 years. But regulations are really tightened up dramatically on surface water. And we were unable to provide that water to Palm Springs or to this village without building filtration. So in 2021, we built a filtration plant. There you can see the filters inside the building. And it's a pilot project that we might expand and end up filtering the water coming into Palm Springs eventually. Our current operations, when we acquired the Palm Springs Water Company and Cathedral City Water Company back in 1968, they were small communities, but they've grown. And today we have 23,492 active connections. So a connection is, or an account is counts as one residence. So we have that many businesses and residences connected to our potable water system. And that equates to about 90,000 people if you take into consideration seasonal population variations. The water is very high quality. The surface water that we provide, also the groundwater, is very high quality. And it meets state and federal guidelines and standards. Even though it does, we're required to take a lot of samples to test it. So we're continuously monitoring our potable water system. We take over 2,600 tests every year, and we conduct a lot of that testing in our own laboratory, which is over by our recycled water facility. And this gentleman is our lab director. He actually came from one of the commercial testing companies, and he does a great job for us. And he works for us full time. And we're just, every year they're adding tests. So that's what the last bullet here is that, as regulations change, you have to take more tests. And so we do a lot of testing. Our pipeline system is pretty large. We have 425 miles of water mains. They were put in the 20s, 30s, and every decade leading up to today, actually. And along the way, we had all kinds of different pipe being put in. We have bare steel pipe with no protection from corrosion outside the pipe or inside the pipe. And today we put in ductile iron pipe, which has cement mortar lining inside to protect it. And it has a coating on the outside, and it's much more durable. Like I said, up until the 1960s, we really put in pipe that was not protected for corrosion. It was bare steel pipe. And luckily, we don't have real corrosive soils or real corrosive water. So those pipelines have lasted us 70 years, 80 years. And but their time for replacement is right now. So we have a very aggressive replacement program. We're replacing about 15,000 lineal feet of pipe every year. We're spending $3 or $4 million annually. And we have about 56 miles of our bare steel pipe to remove from our system. So we're really hurrying to do that because its life cycle is really coming to an end. Our water supplies, we've talked a little bit about that. We are a state water contractor, so we have an imported water supply. There's a vast amount of water in the groundwater aquifer, millions of acre feet in storage, and then some of that water is replenished naturally every year. So that's a source of water. We direct deliver some water off of our streams, as I said, to the Snow Creek Village, and we've been doing that to Palm Springs for 50 years. Up until just last year, we stopped doing that because of the regulation changes. Recycled water, we began that in 1988. We've recycled a lot of water. It's not new water, but it's keeping the groundwater aquifer safe from some contaminants, and it's stretching that water supply further by using it twice. And of course, conservation. We're very big on conservation because the more we conserve, the less we have to import and the more sustainable we are. Replenishment, we talked about the Whitewater recharge facility, and then Desert Hot Springs, we showed you a picture of that too. So these are our two recharge facilities up in the corner of Desert Hot Springs, the northwest corner off of Highway 62. You could drive out there and you could see it. This one is a little harder to see because it's sort of hidden, but it's there. And there are a couple other recharge facilities that Coachella Valley Water District has. One is the Tom Levy facility, which is in the east end of the valley. And then in the mid valley in Palm Desert, they're planning to put another one off of Cook Road at one of their wastewater treatment facilities nearby that. And we put in about 4.3 million acre feet since we started back in 1973. Last year, we recycled 3,800 acre feet of water. We delivered that water to golf courses here in Palm Springs, the Tockwitz Golf Course, Mesquite, Ascena. We send water to the Palm Springs High School. Anywhere there's a large amount of grass, we're anxious to use that supply. It's very carbon, it has very low carbon footprint because of the solar energy. Also because you don't have to pump that water hundreds of feet out from, down below the ground. It's already been pumped out. So when you recycle it, you don't have to reuse that energy. So it's a very environmentally friendly source of water. What's next for DWA? Well, we're planning. We're going through a lot of planning processes right now. So water management really is all about planning. We're trying to look at water demand projections. So, the census just came out. So we're taking a hard look at that to understand what growth is like, or, has been over the last 10 years. We're looking at studies to project what that growth is going to be. We're out there looking at getting other sources of water. We're involved in the Sites Reservoir, which is up above Sacramento. That's a new reservoir. We're looking at improving water conveyance through the Delta. We're invested in the tunnel project that goes under the Delta to shore up the reliability of that source. We're getting some water out of Paris Lake. I said the terminus reservoir for that state water project was Lake Paris. Some water seeps underneath that dam. We're recapturing it, and that's going to become part of our water supply. So we're looking to conserve and get more imported water, whatever we can do. But there's climate change and there's droughts and there's a lot of uncertainties, but that's part of our water management, is to monitor the groundwater levels, monitor the water use, and plan for all those different things that affect water supply in the Indio subbasin, the Mission Creek subbasin, and the Garnet Hill subbasin, and the San Gorgonio Pass subbasin. So, replenishment is key. Even in the 1930s, we knew that there just wasn't enough water supply back then. Even when you looked at the surface water supplies and the groundwater supplies, it was, very evident that we were going to have to go out and get imported water. Coachella Valley Water District did it. They built their Coachella Canal, and Desert Water Agency did it by becoming a state water contractor and participating in that. And the good news is we've really been able to, sustain water levels, and we intend to continue to do that. But replenishment is the key to that. So is conservation, because as you know, we have droughts, and we went through a really bad one here in the last few years, and we did have some conservation measures that we put in place, and that helps you bridge that gap. But we're looking at long-term conservation. There's natural trends. What that really talks about is, the new building standards. Everything in the house that's being built today is much more efficient. You don't have the big lawns. It's desert landscaping. These are ordinances and codes that land use agencies like the cities put in place. We put a self-imposed target. We have said that we want to conserve ourselves 10 to 13% compared to 2013, that the year before the drought. The state is looking at setting efficiency targets, and they're going to do that next year, and then we're going to have to comply with that in 2027. Ashley Metzger is very involved in that. She goes to Sacramento to testify to the State Water Board. She's very active, getting our representatives educated about what we need to have, and letting the legislature know that, you know, the Coachella Valley is a unique place with unique water supplies, unique climate. You know, we're not like San Diego, we're not like Fresno or Santa Barbara. You know, whatever their targets end up being, we need to be able to meet them and comply. We have a lot of incentive programs. Here's a picture of a controller. A smart controller does all the things that you're supposed to do. You're supposed to change the timing of your sprinkler irrigation in the winter and in the summer. And this thing does it itself. It also monitors the temperature and regulates it in accordance to that. If it rains, it shuts itself off. It does a lot of great things, and it really saves water because, you know, people forget and they don't do those things. Technology in irrigation has really come a long way. There are a lot better nozzles out there for your sprinklers. So we have incentives to put in these high-tech sprinkler heads. We also incentivize grass replacement with Desertscape. We have incentives for washing machines and toilets. Unfortunately, I guess commercial only, but we're really trying to push conservation as much as possible. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, for bringing us all the way not only to today, but and beyond. So we are at the end of our planned time interval here, but we are going to stay on for an additional 15 minutes to answer some of the questions that we've received in the chat. So if you're able to stay with us, fabulous. If you're not, this Q&A portion will be part of the recording that you're able to view on Facebook, YouTube, or the DWA website. So if you have to leave and then check it out later, we encourage you to do so. So some of the questions that we've received in the chat thus far, and feel free to continue to add them into the Q&A or chat. One question we received, and I think Steve, you might be the best to speak to this, but perhaps Tom as well. Can you share any information about the Purdue camp?
I defer to Tom on that one.
All right, and Tom just turned his camera and mic off, so we'll see if he can jump in. Tom, it looks like you're still on mute. Yeah, we can't hear you still, Tom. It looks like Tom may be having some audio difficulties, so we're going to go ahead and skip.
There we go. How's that? Is that better?
Yes, sir.
So real quickly, as you saw in one of the previous slides, that the Colorado River Aqueduct passes through the Coachella Valley on the east side of the valley through the Indio Mudhills, or Little San Bernardinos as they're known. Extensive tunneling was done by crews from New Jersey, sand hogs as they were known. And in the early 1930s, in the midst of summer heat, they created a tunnel that goes basically all along the east side of the Coachella Valley. There was a big camp at Purdue Canyon, which housed most of the Metropolitan Water Agency workers. It was kind of a rough and tumble construction camp in the 1930s, with those folks heading into Indio on Friday nights to make their presence known. There are still some remnants at Purdue Canyon of the massive construction sites, but it's incredible to think that tunneling. The entire canal is 232 miles long. A lot of it east of here is open canal, but most of it through the Coachella Valley is tunneled through the mountains. In the area of where our diversion, where DWA's diversion is, it's what they call cut and cover. They cut a big channel and then concrete it and put in a horseshoe canal. And then again, the most impressive part of it was the 13-mile tunnel that was dug through the San Jacinto Mountains at Cabazon. again with pick and shovel in the middle of the depression.
Thank you for that. This might be a good one for Mark. And I can probably help you get started here. We have a question about new development and some concerns about, with water shortages, what is the concern about the footprint of new development? And I think I can start off by saying, Mark and I have done a lot of analysis on different parcels and new developments and housing tracts versus older areas. And it's very clear that these code improvements for indoor and outdoor water use are very effective because the water use per acre is a fraction of existing housing stock. So, you're talking about new housing going in using a household average of about a third of an acre foot compared to roughly an acre foot, or maybe 0.8 of an acre foot. So, very efficient properties, smaller parcels, less turf, more community pools rather than individual pools, desert landscaping. So I think that, we're not a land use approval agency, so we don't really get to say yay or nay on these projects. We just have to be ready to serve them and, bringing in the water to do that. Mark, is there anything you want to add there?
Only that, that is a big concern for us too. That's really at the heart of what we do. We don't want to be late to the party, when the development needs to be built and then have to go out and get the water. We really look into the future. We look at, we work with the general plans that the cities put out and the zoning, and we say, okay, this area can be developed. And based on what Ashley said, we take the new standards and we come up with what the water demand is going to be. And then we say, okay, are we going to have enough water there? And if not, we're taking steps to go out and get that water. So it's really, that's what we're doing. And we're trying to be prepared for that growth. And we are prepared for it.
All right. I am going to ask Steve for a double header here. Any sections of old irrigation canals still in place in town? And then also, if you could share with folks resources on how to get more involved with or join the Palm Springs Historical Society.
Well, I'll take the second question first. That's pretty easy. You can go online to the website and you'll see there a place I think you can click to join the society and get mailings and support the work of the Palm Springs Historical Society, which is worth your support and returns the favor with all kinds of historical materials that are of interest to almost anyone who lives here in the Valley. So I hope I've given a sufficiently long answer that people have forgotten the first question, but now the first question had to do with remnants of canals. And there are remnants of various canals scattered throughout not only the Palm Springs area, but elsewhere in the Valley. The canal that I was talking most about, which was the old canal coming out of Whitewater that was replaced with the pipeline that P.T. Stevens installed. I can't think of any places where you can see remnants of that. There used to be some parts of it that were visible, but over the years there have been storms, there have been floods, there have been other activity, both natural and man-made, such that most of that is gone. And as I say, I can't think of a place. Years ago, I remember seeing sort of actually stumbling across a place where it was clearly an old rock line ditch, which I took to be, it was in the right place to be the Whitewater Canal. But I couldn't point you to a place now.
If I may too, just to piggyback on that, when Desert Water Agency was constructing a portion of the Snow Creek pipeline that comes into Palm Springs, that pipeline was in the median between the on 111 near Windy Point, where the quad motorcycle rental place is. And in doing that excavation, they found a piece of McCallum's original ditch. Jack Obley, who was the general manager at the time, showed it to us, and the board made a decision that we would, in essence, divert the Palm Springs line, the DWA line coming into town, and preserve that. It's covered. But it's been designated in the records. We know where that original McCallum ditch is. Also, for those who would like to see a piece of the Tockwis ditch, if you go to the Indian Canyons Visitor Center at Tockwis, at the end of Mesquite, just beyond the Visitor Center, you'll find the original gate that delivered the water to Palm Springs. Or at the end of Ramon Road, very end of Ramon Road, just to the north, there are some remnants of that ditch as it went through the tennis club area.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Tom. And then last questions here for Mark. We got a question about recycled water, how it's piped to various locations. So that should be fairly simple. And then you talked a lot about really old pipeline in the system and what we're doing to combat that. Can you just maybe touch a little bit more on some of the challenges that come with having an older system?
Okay. Well, the recycled water system, the water flows by gravity from the Palm Springs wastewater treatment plant. It flows by gravity under Chinatri Trail over to our recycled water plant, which is adjacent to the Knott's Soak City. And from there, we pump it into a reservoir or pump it into a structure and filter it. So the filtering is done by gravity, and then it goes into a tank again to be stored. And then we pump it out. We pump it out at about 60 PSI. And it goes through some pretty large mains, about 24-inch mains in different directions up to Ascena. That's a 24-inch line going north. And then it goes west out of the plant and goes to serve the Tockwis Golf Course and then down to Mesquite. And then we have a pipeline that goes up to Indian Canyons as well. That was a newer section of pipe. So it goes out in some pretty large mains and it's all under pressure and then delivered to those, usually to a pond on the golf course. And then from there, they boost that water out of that pond into their irrigation system. And that's how that whole system works. And then the second part of the question was the older pipe. I think we'll be replacing pipe forever. It's kind of Ashley likes to talk about it like the Golden Gate Bridge. You start painting it from one end. When you get to the other end, you got to go back and start again. And that's what's going to happen. When the pipe first went in, we had a grace period where there was no pipeline replacement. But as that first pipe came of age, we started to do pipeline replacements. And we're going to be continuing to do them for a very long time. The only bad thing about the old pipe, that the bare steel, is that it's really all failing at the same time, because that was a really big building boom there in the 60s, the 50s in Palm Springs. So there's a lot of pipe that went in. And so we're having to deal with that. But once we get caught up, I think it's going to be just something that we do every year. And it's not going to be on the scale of 15,000 lineal feet a year. It'll be something less. And the pipe that we put in the ground today should last at least 100 years. So we can, take a little breather and, replace less of that, I hope.
Well, that's promising. We have one final question that was answered, and I think I can tackle this one. The Coachella Valley has a lot of growth since the last drought a few years ago. Is there any control by the water agencies to say no to more development? As I mentioned previously, we're not a land use agency. We don't really give these developments the yay or the nay, but obviously we have to say whether or not a water supply is available to them. And At this point in time, yes, and we are working to make sure that in the future, we're able to continue to say yes as communities build out and infill development occurs. And again, you know, I did mention the efficiency of these new developments, so that is very promising, in addition to the fact that existing housing stock is becoming more efficient. You know, these homes that were put in the 80s are now turning over all of their toilets and shower heads and washing machines, and you know, all of the older homes that are our current inefficient stock are becoming more and more efficient too. So
And I'm sorry, Ashley, when you're done, I just want to add something.
yeah, I know there's a lot of concern about development, and we like to stay a little bit agnostic there and just say that, you know, it's our responsibility to do what we can to bring water into the area. You know, there are some limiting factors. There's only so much water we'll be able to bring in the future, but, you know, we're doing our best to look at those future supplies as well as working with customers here for conservation.
And I just want to say that, you know, you're talking about reduced demand because of efficiencies, but there's also been a lot of change to our water supplies in the last 10, 20 years. Desert Water Agency and Coachella Valley Water District have made really substantial purchases of increased entitlement in the State Water Project. We did that in the mid 2000s. We also got a very large transfer of 100,000 acre feet from Metropolitan in 2010. The Coachella Valley Water District is ramping up their supply because of the quantification settlement. So yeah, the water tables were going down. And I mean, you heard a lot about that in the papers here over the last few years, but that's really turned around. We've kind of turned the corner because of those additional supplies that we acquired. And like I said before, we're acquiring new ones even now that won't really be online until, you know, 10 years from now, but we're doing that work right now in anticipation of that growth.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. I want to thank all of our speakers and all of our attendees, especially the 35 of you that have stuck around for the extra 15 minutes we tacked on here. And last but not least, we wanted to give a shout out to our partners at United Way of the Desert. We were able to present them this morning, our board president, Kristen Bloomer, there with the executive officer of United Way with a $60,000 check. You know, we took a bunch of late fees that we've collected over the years and decided to contribute it to this fund to help our customers, especially those struggling with income due to COVID, get paid up. So if you know anyone that could benefit from this, please share this information. We're working really hard to get the word out there. And I will go ahead and put that URL in the chat in case that you or someone you know may need it. And thank you very much.
Happy birthday, DWA.
Happy birthday, DWA.
Happy birthday.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.